Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Beat the Big Guys. I'm Sandy Rosenthal, your host. And today is my 40th episode of Beat the Big Guys. And my guest today is someone that I could never have done any of these episodes without, and that is my producer, Jess Branas. Hey, Jess.
Hey, Sandy. Congratulations on turning 40.
Thanks so much. But I couldn't have done any of this without you. All of those bloopers and mistakes I've made. Thank goodness you were there to fix them, in addition to all the other wonderful stuff you do as my producer. And also, I want to tell you listeners out there that it was Jess who pushed me let's cut that one out. It was Jess who told me, you got to stop worrying. You got to stop fretting. You got to just start. And she was right. And I did. And here we are today celebrating my 40th episode. So thank you, Jess.
Oh, thank you. It's been such an honor working on this show. And like I told you behind the scenes before we started, I learned so much from you and your guests every week as I'm going through all the tracks. And it's really incredible what you do. And it's kind of like with all the activism, you just have to jump in and start. Somebody has to stand up and start. And you push forward that message beautifully every week.
Well, thank you so much. And today we're going to be hearing about your story. But before we do that, let me tell my listeners out there just a little bit about Jess Branas. She is a 2-time best-selling author, in addition to being a podcast producer and also host of Drinks with Jess. For 8 years, she has used her platform to bring the LGBT and its allies together, and now is pivoting to educate and bring awareness to others regarding the latest anti-LGBT and anti-trans legislation that is going on throughout the U.S. Well, I can't wait to hear more about that.
It's happening quickly, and it's scary. It really is. And a lot of it is affecting kids. These are things that are being initiated that are affecting kids, education, athletics. And I was a former teacher. And as a high school teacher, my job was to treat every kid equally and to make sure they got the best education and that they felt safe. And now we're getting to a point where kids are going to be in a position where they can't express themselves and don't feel safe. The suicide rates are going to go up, drug use is going to go up, bullying is going to go up, and no child should have to go through that at all. So that's where the foundation is.
And how are you going to use your platform to educate? I can't wait to hear about it.
Well, we've already started bringing on now a friend of mine who writes for several platforms, including NBC. He comes on, he does a lot of political commentary with me when we do political shows, which over the past 4 or 5 years has been my issue is really focusing on the politics because, the clown car had arrived. So then once we started seeing lately things happening such as the dissemination of voting rights for communities of color, and then what's happening with taking away the rights for women's health care. And what we noticed was each step was starting to chip away at certain communities. And it wasn't long after, maybe a couple of weeks, where all of a sudden one state starts kind of chipping away at LGBT rights or trans rights. Then once that becomes case law, then another state does it. And it's totally evading the fact that the 14th Amendment protects all people. And so states, for some reason, are being allowed to do this. And with the way that the Supreme Court is, as far as the numbers of the justices and, the conservatives and the left, we're going to see not only the LGBT, but communities of color and even women's issues take, not even 2 steps back. We're talking 50 years back. And that's scary to see with all the progress we've made. And I'm sure they'll do it with environmental things too.
That will probably be next, or going. Actually, it's been going on all along. I've certainly been. I have been called an environmentalist podcast, and I don't mind being labeled that way. Actually, that the podcast is to be big guys of all shapes and forms, because they can wear all kinds of disguises and look like pretty much anyone, like the person next door. But I do have to agree that a lot of the big guys were big oil, big chemical, you know, and those types of bigs. But yes, there are those, that legislation is on the chopping block as well.
And it's a shame, because what I would like to do is bring more of the higher caliber guests on that represent the LGBT, that represent the trans community. And I've had celebrities on before, and I've had business people on before. I mean, so that's not a big issue for me. I've had politicians on before, but I want to start bringing even gay parents who have younger kids in these school districts. I mean, it was just the other day where a man named John Carlo in Nevada, he's running for school board. And he said, well, being gay is unconstitutional because gays can't procreate. I mean, and the video went everywhere of him saying that. So
good.
Why, so it's affecting local offices and state and national. I mean, this is just a huge issue from bottom to top. And unfortunately, and this from working, against certain industries that are creating problems for your community, the people who are pushing this into legislation, well, they're receiving funding from companies who want them to push that legislation through. So the politicians may not have the deep pockets, but the companies that are supporting them and want them to put out that message do.
You mentioned something a moment ago that if we could elaborate on that just a little bit. And you spoke for just a moment about celebrities. And I totally agree that if you can get a celebrity, get one. If you can. A celebrity may not know anything more or may know nothing more about the reasons for what you're doing, but still just getting a face up there carries a lot of weight. And I'll be the first to say, yeah, I've done that. If I could get a celebrity, I got one. Even if the celebrity wasn't an expert or didn't even have any knowledge. If the celebrity would just get up there and read what I handed him or her or them to write, great. And it has worked. And I would like to urge everybody out there, if you know of a connection, use it. But I also want to say, and I'd love to hear how you feel about this. I mean, I might be wrong, that you don't have to have a celebrity.
No, you don't have to. And I'll backtrack on what you just said. You don't necessarily even have to have a connection to a celebrity. I mean, I have, I've been running my show for 8 years. So I will email or even direct message on Instagram or Twitter people, whether celebrities or anybody else. And many of them say, yeah, I would, once they hear about the show and how long I've been running, they say, yeah, we'll absolutely come on, especially if they're a huge advocate. And if it's something that's currently in the news that the world is going through, or the local communities or states are going through, they're more than happy to put their voice out there for that. So
the moral to the listeners is also don't be afraid to ask someone who you don't know them or they don't know you. Don't be afraid to do that as well, because if they care, they'll want to jump on the bandwagon.
It's like my uncle used to say, you don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah. Yep. That's a very, very,
what's the worst that's going to happen? Either they won't get back to you or they'll say no. But what if they say yes? You kind of have to look at it from that angle. And if some of them say no, there are going to be others that say yes. And it doesn't have to, like you said, it also doesn't have to be a celebrity. It could be, a local business person in your community, or somebody who has, some kind of clout or experience with this. I mean, I am more than happy to bring on members of the school boards that I know and bring them on, because it does affect that environment.
Right. And so absolutely. And the only thing I can add is I want to caution everybody not to make the mistake that I made when I'm telling you about this, not to toot my own horn. I'm telling you about a mistake I made. And that was, I thought I needed a celebrity before beginning my organization, levies.org. And I wasted precious time looking for a celebrity that could be a spokesperson. And I looking back, it was time wasted. I should have said, I'll be the spokesperson for now, and when the time comes, we'll get one. And we did, and eventually that time did come. So don't feel you have to have one, and don't stop your work because you don't have a spokesperson. Again, so bottom line, you got one, great. You don't have one, proceed anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah, you never stop the show. You just keep going on with the message, because your intention when you are either going up against a big guy or going up against legislation or something going on in the community, your first intention is to educate people on it and educate yourself on it. It doesn't matter who else is involved. It doesn't matter if they are high caliber or not, because your intention is not to bring celebrities on your show. Your intention or to your community meeting, your intention is to make a difference. And the only way to start doing that, like you've said plenty of times on your show, is you read, you research, you educate yourself, because a lot of the people who are the big guys don't expect you to do it. And that's the thing. And unfortunately, these issues that I am now starting to work with, well, I mean, I've always been in this facet because that's just my community. But what I realized is my generation and the older generation, now I'm 45. So my generation, the older generation, like the Stonewall generation, they keep it ahead of what's going on. The younger generation aren't the ones who are listening to the news, reading the newspapers. I mean, there are laws or legislation that are being enacted now and being looked at now in Missouri, in Kentucky, in your great state of Louisiana, in my state of Pennsylvania, in Ohio, in Tennessee, in Alabama, I mean, Texas. We all saw what happened with Florida. So it's important. And again, I was a high school teacher and the kids did not want to do research. It's not the same anymore. They didn't Google things. They're not looking at CNN or reading MSNBC or NBC or any other, channel that they want to watch, but they're not allowing themselves to be informed, and they're not doing the research yet. So it's my generation that's got to say, hey, listen, we need to help you, and we can't help you unless you're educated about what is going on right now that's going to affect you even in the next 6 months.
You're absolutely right. I was, in addition to everything you said, I was surprised to learn how many young people are not voting. I was very surprised to hear that. So you're right. You've given me an even bigger reason to keep doing this podcast, even though I've reached the 40th episode. I now realize how many more I need to do.
Sandy, I'm on like 233. I think I just put out.
Good for you. Wow.
Come on. You got more in you. I know you do.
Yeah. I've got more, and more is coming. Jess, you mentioned something else, which I think is really important. You talked about funding. And that's not something that I've discussed a whole lot on my show, because guests haven't brought it up. But I've been waiting for this moment. So thank you for bringing it up. And that is, funding. And so you have two challenges. One is, where is the funding going to come from? And then the other challenge is when someone points their finger at your chest and says, who's funding your work? People have create suspicions and create accusations, even if they're not true. So funding is something really important. It should not be ignored. I wouldn't let it stop you from beginning. And too many people are frozen because they're concerned about, where will I get the money to do this or to get that? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but don't let that stop you. So what can you share with our listeners today about funding?
Well, I've never had to fund anything yet, but I'm sure that with this pivot, it's going to be necessary. I think that it's important if you're going to look at funding to capitalize on where the community is involved with it. So for example, if this legislation keeps going through, and my job is to educate people and get funding to bring communities together to be able to help combat this legislation. Because when you're going against the government, that's a big deal. I mean, you went against the Army Corps of Engineers, so that was not cheap, I'm sure. Mm-mm. But, for me, for example, it's Pride season. I do media coverage for all the prides from New York to Washington, D.C. So for me, I could utilize that and educate the community while they're there, because most of the people there are going to know what's going on. And I can say, okay, this is what I'm doing. I would love for you to sign this. And if you can donate to this cause so we can get this in front of a court or have a hearing or, whatever we need that for, to travel to these places when they're voting on this bill, and what I've noticed with our community, the LGBT community, is that we will come together and help donate to causes that help us as a community, entirely. And we're, you look at the whole United States, we're a big community. People set up fundraisers on Facebook. If you have a lot of followers, like I have a lot of followers on Facebook, I have other podcasts, you could go on to other podcasts and say, this is what I'm doing. I know that your show deals with this. I would love to talk about it. We are raising funds for this particular issue.
Right.
And so there are ways to reach out to people who are going to believe in that cause.
There are. And it starts by first opening your mouth and saying you're working on this cause. And then you can say, I need funding. And there is no reason that a small little nonprofit or whatever you want to call yourself, either a group or a nonprofit, whatever you want to call yourself, you don't have to be a 501c3. You don't have to do these special arrangements where you have to report all your income. You can just take the money and as long as you're set up as a nonprofit, you're good. Mm-hmm. And okay, so, but a really critical and important thing that people need to realize if they see a problem in their neighborhood and they want to do something, so many experts will volunteer their expertise for free. Mm-hmm. And Absolutely. they will want to do it. And they will either come to you or you can ask them. But I found that the more often than not, they come to me and offer their expertise. And that could take many forms. It could be law, media. In my case, which was critical, was engineering, software issues, digital issues, social media. The experts will, if they see you doing something and they feel that they believe in what you're doing, they'll offer their expertise. And they don't even, at first I used to thank people by sending them a New Orleans like treat, like candy or something. I stopped doing it because all they wanted is to know that I used their advice and just
Absolutely.
show them that you used your advice. And that's all the thanks they want. Mm-hmm. They don't want you to buy anything for them. So I stopped doing that.
Yeah. I think it's important that you network with your community. So like, a whole bunch of people who are part of situations where the environment was concerned. Mm-hmm. And you even had to research people and reach out to them, or you knew somebody who knew somebody, and you networked that way. With any community, whether it's mine, whether it's the people that you, help and work with, everybody has a skill. Mm-hmm. And like, for example, I did an event at the New Jersey LGBT Chamber of Commerce years ago, and I did some media coverage for one of their fundraising events. If I could tell you, out of 200 people there, I guarantee each one of those 200 people would have a skill that could help me do this. And I guarantee if I called on them in a heartbeat, they would help, because it's something that they care about. So as long as you can tap into the people who actually care about that issue, most people are not going to say no, even if it's like having a skill. Maybe it's donating $2 if they can. It doesn't matter. Every little bit is helpful. Every little bit. Those
Every
$2,
little bit.
those $2 can make 20 signs that you could hold up at a rally.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you think
And
about it,
let's
it goes
not
a long
forget
way.
Artists and musicians.
Mm-hmm.
Artists and
Oh,
musicians.
yeah.
I mean, the value that they can bring with their expertise, and they're happy, and also they get some recognition as well. So that so not in every case, but in many cases, you can utilize the expertise and also give them a name plug if they would like that. You know, some of them would prefer that you not. And then also, we're talking about fundraising. A lot of people may say, look, I can't put my name on this, but I'm happy to fund this. And there's a lot of that kind of folks out there.
So, absolutely. There are, especially in my community, like if they're not a part of the LGBT and maybe they're voting a different way, but secretly they're like, yeah, this is okay. I just can't have my name attached to it. I'll still take your money for that. I may call you out and blackmail you later. No, I'm just kidding. I wouldn't do that. No, well, maybe I would, but but that's the thing. I think what gets people riled up the most is utilizing their skill or sharing themselves with something that they believe in, because they have the ability to. We're not their bosses. We're not double checking what they're doing. We're saying, we know that you have this skill, do it to it. Show your best 100%. We can't wait. And I know when somebody asks me to do something worthwhile, because I've done free media coverage for years for certain things. I do it for all the prides. I do free media coverage. I don't get paid to do media coverage, but I do it because I know it brings the community together. But it makes me happy. And I think it makes people happy to be a part of a community and to help, because that's really what it comes down to. It's being able to help with your special talent or gifts that maybe sometimes are overlooked by your job or by your family. And it's very special when that comes together.
It's so special. But it won't happen if you don't speak up. And there's a movie, Build It and They Will Come. We should come up with something in Beating the Big Guys. Speak out and they will come.
Well, Sandy, that's why I started producing shows rather than just doing my own, was to allow other people to learn how to have this type of platform to speak up. I was one of those kids when I was in elementary school. I was one of those kids who didn't raise my hand. I could dance on stage. I remember when I got to do the audio engineering for the choir when I was 13 years old, because I loved making people sound good. And that was something that always stuck with me. So with podcasting, I had my show. And then when I went into production for people such as yourself, that was the most important thing. I want people who have that message, who have the ability to help, who have the ability to bring a community together, to speak up. That's the most important thing, because you know what? There are sometimes you don't know what happens when you get older or later on in life. There may be a time where you're not able to speak at all.
A good point. And what's so interesting, I cannot imagine you not raising your hand.
I was shy.
I know the Jess Branas of today, but I also was the same. I tell people I know now that I was shy and uncomfortable socially, and people that don't believe it. Certainly not the shyness. I may be still uncomfortable socially, but I'm not shy. Not. In fact, it was a big opening a realization for me when I realized shyness is a liability. Shyness will hold you back. And so the shyness could be that thing keeping some of our listeners back from speaking out against the big guys. But take it from me and Jess, from Sandy and Jess. Hey, we were the shy ones that never raised their hands, and look, and look at us now, and you can too.
Absolutely.
I'm really glad you brought that up.
Kind of weird story, but yeah.
Well, and then we've the few people can believe I'm actually born profoundly deaf with a terrible speech problems. And I overcame them, and here I am doing my own podcast. So look, if I can beat the big guys and do my own podcast, you out there, you can do anything you set your mind to do. Absolutely. Anything.
Absolutely. And that's what it's all about. I mean, people just have to, if you want to make change, you have to stand up. You just have to stand up. You have to speak up, and people will join you. You may be the first person to say something, but that doesn't mean that you're the only person who is thinking that way.
And you don't have to feel you need to do everything yourself. One of the things that's going to be really important early on is that you start relegating and delegating, and take some time to have, much as you may think you may do a better job at something, you've still got to pass off things to other people. And also, you cannot forget to take time to take care of yourself.
Absolutely.
So Jess, how do you take care of yourself when you need some downtime?
Well, first of all, Sandy, I'm a nut job, so I don't sleep often. So I work out every morning. I just recently started running again, and now it dropped 40 degrees. So I did not do that today. But I try and run about 4 times a week. I kind of took a break from it for about 2 years. I weightlift every day. Of course, I talk about Nacho, my dog Nacho, all the time. So we go for a nice run in the morning also. And that's, I take my time in the morning to do all of my self-care. I meditate. I love yoga. I have a stretching routine every morning because I'm getting old and I'm starting to feel it, from sitting and working at the computer. And I take a lot of time to read. And I think for me, some people like to read novels. I tend to read things that stimulate my mind, because the majority of my day is sitting behind a computer screen, either doing some research or editing, small pieces of everybody's shows. So for me, I need something that stimulates my brain in a different way. So whether it's reading, like right now, I'm reading an archaeological study that was done in 1939, and it's a 13-volume set of books, and each book is about 1,500 pages. It's amazing. It's amazing to hear about the civilization of the world, like 20,000 years ago. Not just barking because he knows how excited I get, but that's what I like to do to relax. I practice my guitar. I practice piano. I'll, practice dancing. I used to be a professional dancer 20 years ago, but I'll still do that. And that's how I kind of fill my cup, so I can make sure that other people are filled from me as well.
And this is so important. And it's one of the first things that leaders tend to forget, is they forget that they need to take care of themselves. And especially, an amateur leader, and most of the work I'm talking about, stepping out and doing something you've never done before makes you an amateur leader. And the first thing to go is your self-care. And that is just so important.
Oh, absolutely. Now, I can't sit there and say that I have not had days where I know I have a lot of work to do and I skip a workout or I skip this. And then you know what happens? I feel off. It's kind of like if I don't shower in the morning, my day is kind of a little bit off, or sometimes majorly off. So for me, keeping that routine and making sure I take care of myself first in the morning. There may be times where you might text me at 8:30 in the morning and I don't get back to you till 10 because I'm taking care of myself, and I don't check my messages because I don't turn on my phone if I'm in that mode, except to talk to my mother. That is the one thing I will stop for.
Well, with my organization, levies.org, there was one of the members of the board who I knew never text him before noon, because I wasn't going to hear back from him. So he is an evening guy, an afternoon and evening guy. So, and you learn different people's rhythms, but it is so, I'm so glad to hear that you do that. And I'm not surprised, because the successful people who beat the big guys are people who remember to take time to take care of themselves. Because if you, the leader of this group, self-implodes from being overworked or overstressed, and stress causes terrible health problems.
Mm-hmm.
The health problems are innumerable.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so important to take care of yourself. And go-getters like me and Jess, I don't know about you, Jess, but sometimes I feel a little guilty, taking time for myself.
I feel guilty when I decide to have adult time with my friends and leave Nacho at home. That is when I feel guilty. But I love that you brought up the health problems, because I really started taking care of myself spiritually and mentally. And I mean, I was an athlete when I was younger, but just physically, about 10 years ago at 35, because I went through cancer at 35. And I did not have cancer in my family. It was from overexposure to radiation, because I grew up near 3 Mile Island and I was a baby when it melted down, which is probably why I'm still fascinated with your show, because I will sit there sometimes and I will research, like, I want to know why they didn't do anything about 3 Mile Island, like, to this day, because after I was diagnosed, I had tons of people that I went to school with who are my age who were diagnosed, because that cancer was slow growing, like 25, 30 years. And when I had to do that, I was finishing up grad school. This came about like all of a sudden. My dad saw my throat swollen. He was a doctor. I went in for an ultrasound. They found a lump. They did a biopsy, came back benign. They threw me into surgery anyway. It turns out there was cancer behind it. So I actually wasn't even diagnosed until my surgery, until they opened me up. Wow. And I was very fortunate that there was no radiation, there was no chemo, but I have friends who did have to go through everything. But that's the first thing I did when it happened, is that I spoke up. The second thing I did was say, I am now living for me. And I made sure I was healthy for that surgery. And that continued on for the rest of my life. Whether it was saying, I'm going to speak up, I'm going to do this project, I'm going to release this podcast, I'm going to write this book, I'm going to speak in front of this crowd. Like, at this point, enough with what everybody else expects of me. This is what I am doing, because that is honoring me and what I can bring to people.
That's really beautiful. And I'm so happy that you're cancer-free, and so excited about the work that you're embarking on right now. And if anybody would like to get involved or to know more about the work you're doing, what would you suggest our listeners do?
I suggest you read the show notes of Sandy's podcast after you listen to it every week, is what I think, because my email's in there. Actually, everybody can tune into Drinks with Jess if they want to. We're on every platform, including YouTube. And otherwise, you can reach out to me anywhere from email at branasenterprises.com or branasenterprises@gmail.com, or you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, you name it. Just look up my name, just look up Jess Branas, and you'll find all the information. Because I think, like, if you Google me, there's like 14 pages of like research that's out there. Good. Which is kind of sick and weird, but fun.
Is there any other gem that you'd like to offer to our listeners before we close for today?
I do. I think the most important thing is to really know what's important to you and why. And there may not be an issue in your particular community, but it may be something that is being seen in another local community or a state or even nationally that you can get involved in. But the most important thing is to acknowledge what it is that you want to see be changed and make it known. Make it known to your friends, make it known to your family, because you never know who's going to be interested in that or wants to help you because they love you. Because I could tell you that's one of the biggest things. Some people are afraid to reach out to their friends. Some people are afraid to reach out to their families and say, hey, listen, this is really important to me. I'm going to do this. This is what I've been thinking about, this, what I'm researching. I'm sick of this or sick of that, or I don't want this company here. Reach out to your family and friends, because they will support you.
I think those were very important and very beautiful closing words for this, the 40th episode of Beat the Big Guys. So thank you, Jess, so much. And I hope all of you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to rate, subscribe, and review this podcast on all of your favorite platforms. And remember, no matter who you are, you can beat the big guys.
Yes. That was awesome, Sandy.
Yay, big 40.
You know, it's so funny. I remember when we did that first run through before you started